Ship, Fast Track, EMS, Parcel Service, Registered Mail, Corporate Mail Service, and Private Letterbox. Access customer service support and track packages online. Visit our post offices island-wide and premium service centers at select locations. For more information, go to jamaicapost.gov.jm. Conditions apply.
This is where our journey ends, but only for today. Do join us again tomorrow for another informative program. In the meantime, stay connected via our website at jis.gov.jm. And while you're online, send your feedback to Jamaica Magazine at jis.gov.jm or via X at JIS News. You may also find us on all the major social media platforms and through our mobile app that's Android and iOS compatible. On behalf of the entire production team, I'm Adrian Atkinson. Do take care.
This has been a production of the Jamaica Information Service, the voice of Jamaica.
Tune in to Lead Story, weekdays at 6 p.m. Hosted by Jody Ann Quarry.
Brought to you by
Horizon, a new loan product from Access Financial Services. Good evening. Tonight, the courtroom door swings open, but virtually. Chief Justice Brian Sykes announces a landmark live stream for the Julian Silvera sentencing. Is this the end of the secret gun court or a digital spectacle in the making? Then, diplomatic fracture. As Caricom leaders meet in St. Kitts, Washington is redrawing the map. With Trinidad pivoting to Florida and a powerful U.S. congressman warning that Jamaica will pay, we ask, is regional unity dissolving under pressure? From the high stakes of diplomacy to a domestic tragedy in Portland. Westmoreland. Dacia Forrester is fighting for her life after being set ablaze. Where was a systemic intervention before the conflict turned catastrophic? And as Reggae Month draws to a close, we look at the cultural and economic footprint of the Lost in Time Festival. Dr. Dennis Howard joins us to discuss if the reggae revival is translating into real revenue. I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and this is Lead Story. For over 50 years, the Jamaican Gun Court has operated behind closed doors, a necessary shield against the intimidation tactics of organized gangs. But in a landmark decision that signaled a new era for the judiciary, Chief Justice Brian Sykes has announced that the sentencing of former Member of Parliament Julian Silvera will be live-streamed to the world on March 6, 2026. The move comes after Silvera's recent guilty plea to manslaughter, a development that has already ignited fierce public debate over justice and accountability. The Chief Justice argues that open justice is essential for public confidence, But does broadcasting the final act of a closed-door case clarify the law, or does it merely satisfy public curiosity? Joining us to dissect the legal and ethical implications is one of Jamaica's most distinguished defense attorneys, Lloyd McFarlane. Mr. McFarlane, you've previously stated that the gun court was never intended to be a shield in tragedies involving guns from licensed firearm holders. But there has been a big discussion tonight about if the system is catching up to the reality of open justice and now shifting away from the way that the gun court has previously operated. As you heard what the Chief Justice said today, what is your thought on this?
Well, as I had also said on the last occasion I was on, one of my major concerns is that certainly for the Supreme Court in Kingston, that the public has been systematically kept out of the court. And for all practical purposes, the public is really not allowed in. This is no good for justice because of the very needs of transparency. So when we have a move where the court now is talking about live streaming parts of the case, this is a step forward. But let me be clear, it does not replace the fact that the public must be allowed in court. Also here, it does not entirely replace the fact that the news media has been kept in the dark on several high-profile cases, when in fact, if the media had been reported on them, then we would not have all type of conspiracy theories being developed as to what is going behind them. Let us be clear also on this development. It is not the first time that the court will be live streaming aspects of its judgment.
Is it for the first time for the gun court, a court that's particularly and specifically in camera? Because if the purpose of it is to protect witnesses from gang reprisals, but not to cloak domestic matters, does that mean that a live streaming in the gun court, this particular case with this particular legislation, is a new thing that's happening?
Well, you have to look at it in the context of what happened in the last case where there was a live streaming in terms of sentencing. That is a matter in which I appeared called the Klansman gang trial. And there, the court had always planned to live stream that part, but it had its difficulties because it also wanted to protect witnesses in terms of their names not being called at any time. So for that reason, for a start, it could not do the case fully in terms of live streaming. What happened when the sentencing was being done was that the Chief Justice could now deal with aspects of the case that would not prejudice the outcome of the case in terms of the public getting a certain view of things. So when it came to sentencing, the chances of the accused persons being prejudiced in terms of their trial was no longer there.
Is this different in the Julian Silvera case, however? Because in this case, there was initially a charge for murder with a plea down to manslaughter, and the gun court is an in-camera private proceeding that is taking place. It was always meant to be private. It's different from the Klansman trial, in which there had been an anticipation that some aspect of the case would be televised, versus now, this case, where there had been no notification that there would be this case, any part of it being televised at all, until the Chief Justice's announcement today.
What you have to remember is that the Klansman case was definitely in camera according to statute because of the anti-gang statutes. That is no different from the gun court statutes that require that they be in camera because of fears of gangs. This case, the Julian Silvera case,
yes,
required no real in-camera proceedings because it was not the type of situation where you were protecting people.
So you're saying it could always have been televised, the entire thing?
And the press should have been allowed in it from the beginning.
All right, a sentencing hearing, which is what will be taking place on March 6th, is often the most emotional part of the process. The court wasn't opening itself up to cameras. There's the risk of the presence of cameras now risk turning the judicial decision into a performance for the public, or is it now the only way to ensure skeptical citizens that the law is being applied fairly to the powerful?
Well, you have to remember here that the sentencing process is before the judge alone.
In this particular case, because it's before the gun court.
Right. And in any event, even if it was a case that was not before the gun court, the sentencing is still for the judge alone.
Do, yes.
And when you have a situation where it is a judge alone handling the matter, the emotions are out, because the judge will not be influenced by all type of things that might be said outside of the court. So there's no real concern in that regard. As for the lawyers, when I did the matter with the Klansman thing, I didn't see anybody grandstanding.
But it's not emotional necessarily for those sitting in that courtroom on that day. For family and friends and the nation watching, as they're now trying to figure out what a manslaughter plea means, what takes place now, what this early discount that we've heard is open and available to persons who plea early in advance because they had not been privy to the details prior, but will now be seeing the sentencing part. Will it be emotional for them, or will it be necessary for the judge in this part of the trial to work through the process so that the public has a better understanding? Because Chief Justice Brian Sykes has also said part of the opening up is a public education.
Yes. Now, in terms of the family and so on, they would normally be allowed in to hear and see what is going on. In terms of the public, let me say that when I'm doing, say, a sentencing matter, a part of my address to the court is actually aimed at the public's understanding. I will go through what the judge has to consider, mostly because members of the public will be saying, and why do that, etc. And you have to show, both yourself and the court must show what the process is really about.
I think that's important. The public, though, was braced for a murder trial. Provocation was raised as a defense in this particular case, and they received a manslaughter plea based on that provocation defense. How critical is this broadcast in explaining the technical legal difference to a public that might perceive this as a deal?
Well, in the first place, if we had the transparency that should have been there from the outset, we would not have this situation where people are questioning about what might have gone on behind closed doors. This transparency is necessary. I have always preferred, however, where the public is allowed in, but this will have to do. Now, in this particular situation, yes, you're talking about emotions because there's a big difference in sentencing between manslaughter and murder, a huge difference. For one thing, for murder, you have a mandatory minimum of so many years, depending on the type of murder charged. Where you have manslaughter, as I've said, it ranges very widely and causes persons to wonder how him get that sentence. But people have to understand, he's not going to be sentenced for murder. That is not the charge that the Chief Justice will be dealing with. That is not the charge that the prosecution will be dealing with. That is not the charge that the defense will be dealing with. There's also one other important development. Usually, it was the defense alone that made arguments before the court in terms of a reduction, mitigation of sentence. Nowadays, the prosecution speaks, because the whole process has become so carefully worked out in terms of what can be taken into account, that now the prosecution has a right to speak.
The prosecution has a right to speak, a right to defend the public on this matter, a right to then be part of this open justice process that certainly we'll be waiting for and hoping to see in that live stream on March 6th. We're joined here by Lloyd McFarlane, and he's certainly spent the time to help us better appreciate not only what has taken place today in the Chief Justice, explaining now that we will be having a live streaming of the sentencing on March 6th, but also what not to expect. Not a murder sentence, but instead one for manslaughter, given that is what the court had accepted. Thanks so much for joining us inside Lead Story, Lloyd McFarlane. We'll take a break and come back to you, moving now to geopolitics, all the way to St. Kitts, and look how Jamaica gets involved as well. We'll be having that conversation next inside Lead Story.
the 2026 Reggae Gold Awards ceremony, National Arena, Friday, February 27. Join the stars of reggae music on the red carpet as a grateful nation honors its musical ambassadors. Plus, performances by Richie Stevens, Etana, Chris Malachi, Lost and Kawa Reggae Band, straight out of China. Yes, a Chinese reggae band. To cap it all, the Reggae Messenger, Luciano live with the Reggae Gold Orchestra. And Ken Booth being inducted into the Jamaica Music Museum Hall of Fame. And CVM will be there to capture every moment starting at 8 p.m. That's the 2026 Reggae Gold Awards ceremony, National Arena, Friday, February 27. Another Reggae Month 2026 event.
Kingston, get ready! 100 Kingston presents the 10 times 10 anniversary party. When? Saturday, February 28th. We're at 100 Hope Road, Kingston, Jamaica. Live on stage, Christopher Martin, Beanie Man, Agent Sasko, and Egyptian. Gates open at 6 p.m. General admission, 10,000. VIP, 25,000. Get your tickets at 100 Hope Road, Megamark, Watson, Port Moore, Gina's Pharmacy, Ribis, Arden Road, Jannon Open House and Devon House, and Ribis Gas Station, Washington Boulevard.
Jamaica's unemployment rate has fallen to 3.3%, down from 13.2% in 2016. Our government's continued focus on job creation is delivering real results. We are building Jamaica. The Time by the Office of the Prime Minister.
As the 50th regular meeting of Caricom Heads of Government continues in St. Kitts and Nevis, the image of regional unity is under intense strain. While leaders deliberate in Basse-Terre under the theme, Beyond Words, Action Today for a Thriving, Sustainable Caricom, developments outside the room suggest a shift in Washington's approach. Analysts describe it as a move from multilateral engagement to what is being called selective bilateralism. Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar has departed the summit ahead of a reported high-level meeting in Doral, Florida, scheduled for early March. She's expected to join Guyana's President, Dr. Irfan Ali, in talks with U.S. officials. The optics are striking. Individual leaders engaging with Washington directly, even as the CARICOM bloc meets collectively. Meanwhile, Barbados' Prime Minister Mia Mottley has declined to address regional issues, saying any strain on such matters is behind closed doors and should stay there. But the pressure is not merely diplomatic. Yesterday, February 25, Cuban authorities reported that 4 people were killed and 6 injured after a Florida-registered speedboat entered Cuban territorial waters and an exchange of gunfire followed. U.S. officials have denied direct involvement and indicated that an investigation is underway. The presence of the United States' Secretary of State on the ground at the summit in St. Kitts, though, was always a signal. But the events of yesterday have raised the stakes. Now, our Prime Minister was there as well, and Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness framed Jamaica's position on Cuba around sovereignty and dialogue. Within hours, though, a U.S. Congressman, Carlos Jimenez, publicly rejected that framework. Let's hear Prime Minister Holness's words and why this has now set off something that Congressman Jimenez says Jamaica will have to pay for.
We must address the situation in Cuba with clarity and courage. Cuba is our Caribbean neighbor. Its doctors and teachers have served across our region. Its people are part of our shared history. But today, the Cuban people face severe economic hardship, energy shortages, and growing humanitarian strain. Jamaica is sensitive to the struggles of the Cuban people. Humanitarian suffering serves no one. Apart from our fraternal care and solidarity with the Cuban people, it must be clear that a prolonged crisis in Cuba will not remain confined to Cuba. It will affect migration, security, and economic stability across the Caribbean basin. It is therefore important that we carefully consider this matter and take collective action. Let there be no doubt, Jamaica stands firmly for democracy, human rights, political accountability, and open market-based economies. We do not believe that long-term stability can exist where economic freedom is constrained and political participation is limited. Sustainable prosperity requires openness to ideas, to enterprise, to investment, and to the will of the people. This moment, therefore, calls not for rhetoric, but for responsible statecraft, even as we encourage support for humanitarian relief. Jamaica supports constructive dialogue between Cuba and the United States aimed at de-escalation, reform, and stability. We believe there is space, perhaps more space now than in years past, for pragmatic engagement that protects the Cuban people from any further deterioration in their circumstances and instead promotes national and regional prosperity.
That about 2-minute and 30-second segment of the Prime Minister's speech there in St. Kitts out of a 25-minute statement that he gave. Well, that's all he spoke about on Cuba. But a U.S. Congressman, Congressman Jimenez, is chairman of the House Homeland Security Subcommittee on Transportation and Marine Security and a member of the House Armed Services Committee. And he said that Jamaica will pay for the statements made by Prime Minister Dr. Holness, indicating as well that he couldn't understand Jamaica's support for Cuba as he claimed that they had intervened in Jamaica, affecting the Jamaica Labour Party. But this congressman can influence legislative hearings, budgetary signals, and the oversight environment that shapes security cooperation. So the central question is this: can Caricom maintain a unified position when Washington is signaling that neutrality may carry costs? Joining us now online are Dr. Sanjay Badri Maharaj, regional security expert, and Christoph Simpson, the chairman of the Jamaica Left Alliance for National Democracy and Socialism. Let me start off with Christoph first in studio with me. You've heard Prime Minister Dr. Holness. You've seen the drama that has happened in St. Kitts during this 50th Caricom Heads of Government meeting, and now what took place off the coast of Cuba yesterday. All of this together, what's your initial reaction, not only to the statements, but now what's going on in the region?
I think we should, I agree with Andrew's words, even though I don't think he was doing that in his own speech. We have to be clear in this moment and pragmatic as well. But I think the idea of pragmatism has been associated with picking no sides and being too nuanced to the point of not actually standing up for something or having a particular desired outcome. What is our desired outcome? No, the speech that he gave signals that he blames internal things in Cuba rather than the blockade for the situation in Cuba, even though the rationale behind the blockade, as admitted openly by the US, and I said it here on CVM the other day, is that the US intentionally creates hunger and suffering in Cuba. So when he says that nobody benefits from that, it contradicts the fact that the US actually announces this as an intended policy outcome. So we have to be clear, and if we're opposed to humanitarian suffering, we have to acknowledge that. And if we're talking about our sovereignty, this divide and rule thing that the US is trying with us, we have to realize that that's a threat on our sovereignty, and we have to realize that the kidnapping of Maduro and then now US having its eyes on Cuba are threats to the region's sovereignty.
I think that's important to highlight as well. But Dr. Badri Maharaj, when the United States engages individual CARICOM leaders bilaterally, and that's the Doral Shield of the Americas summit that's coming up. This is happening, though, during a collective summit, leading to your Prime Minister, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, going home. So she was yesterday back in Trinidad. Is this a deliberate strategy to weaken the bloc's bargaining power?
What bargaining power? That's the first question you should ask. The United States has always dealt bilaterally with countries. It has given lip service to CARICOM. But frankly, the United States has never particularly cared what CARICOM thinks one way or the other. As a group, it has always sought to engage with individual countries because CARICOM does not have a unified position on everything. And we saw that, let's just be very clear on something. In 1983, CARICOM did not have a unified position on Grenada. And you saw Jamaica, Barbados, and the OECS going off with the United States and ensuring that providing a veneer of legitimacy to a U.S. invasion into Grenada that resulted in the removal of the court dictatorship. Now, I mean, whether that was a good thing or a bad thing is another story. I have a very firm view on that, having remembered the murder of Maurice Bishop. But the fact is, of course, the U.S. is going to engage individual countries because they are individual countries and they do not have a unified position. Let me come back to a very fundamental point. Jamaica is closer to Cuba than Trinidad will ever be, both geographically and in terms of what the relationship has been. Now, it's not to say Trinidad has a bad relationship with Cuba. It really doesn't. But it doesn't have much of one at all in a real sense. Similarly, Guyana has not had a very close relationship with the Cuban government for a while, although a lot of Cubans go to work in Guyana. A lot of Cubans go to work in Guyana. And a very pithy comment was mentioned to me today by an American colleague. And this is no fan of Trump or anything like that, but he said it bluntly. He said, Guyana has oil, Trinidad has sense, and CARICOM as a bloc is useless.
And I think that is certainly something that, hearing now the heads speak at the Heads of Government Conference, you certainly did see Prime Minister Holness's position about it not being an ever closer union, mirroring what we would have seen in the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, or the European Union, but instead a looser connection of states that would be working together. Christophe, as we're watching this situation here in Trinidad, or rather in St. Kitts and Nevis, watching these CARICOM leaders make these statements, it seems that everybody is meant to go their own way. This statement that had been made by Prime Minister Holness there on the ground, echoed in large part by Kamala Persad-Bissessar, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, was that those who are closest to the things must have their opinions and CARICOM must support them no matter what they decide. Is that what you believe many persons in the region understand CARICOM to be doing, especially as they're dealing with regional issues?
I think there's more regionalism in the other countries than, say, in Jamaica. I don't think our regular people are as attached to CARICOM as regular people in some other Caribbean
Do you believe that's geography, that we're in the Northern Caribbean and the OECS members are in line with one another, next to one another? Barbados is right, it's close to the rest of the Caribbean in that respect. Trinidad and Tobago also there. That is, do you think that proximity has something to do with that?
I think it could have something to do with it, but whether it has something to do with it or not is just... there's a lot of history could go over as well, which is probably due to the proximity issues as well. But
hold on. I want to hear more from you, but I want to take a quick break here inside Lead Story here with Dr. Sanjay Badri Maharaj and Christophe Simpson as we continue to find out what all these regional shifts mean for us, especially with a boat accident off the coast of Cuba just yesterday. Stay with us.
the 2026 Reggae Gold Awards ceremony, National Arena, Friday, February 27. Join the stars of reggae music on the red carpet as a grateful nation honors its musical ambassadors. Plus, performances by Richie Stevens, Etana, Chris Malachi, Lost and Kawa Reggae Band, straight out of China. Yes, a Chinese reggae band. To cap it all, the Reggae Messenger, Luciano live with the Reggae Gold Orchestra. And Ken Booth being inducted into the Jamaica Music Museum Hall of Fame. And CVM will be there to capture every moment starting at 8 p.m. That's the 2026 Reggae Gold Awards ceremony, National Arena, Friday, February 27. Another Reggae Month 2026 event.
Kingston, get ready! 100 Kingston presents the 10 times 10 anniversary party. When? Saturday, February 28th. We're at 100 Hope Road, Kingston, Jamaica. Live on stage, Christopher Martin, Beanie Man, Agent Sasko, and Egyptian. Gates open at 6 p.m. General admission, 10,000. VIP, 25,000. Get your tickets at 100 Hope Road, Megamark, Waterloo, and Portmore. Gina's Pharmacy, Ribis, Arden Road, Jandan Open House at Devon House, and Ribis Gas Station, Washington Boulevard.
Enjoy peace of mind in knowing that your hard-earned money is protected by the JDIC. That's right, the JDIC through the Deposit Insurance Scheme guarantees up to $1.2 million of your deposits in commercial banks, merchant banks, and building societies. This means your deposits, such as your savings and checking accounts, are covered. Rest easy, knowing that your deposits are secure. Your deposits always protected. For more information, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at JDICJAM or visit our website at www.jdic.org.
JDIC, protecting deposits for you and me.
Jamaica, make we do the right thing. Make we live good today for a better tomorrow. Talk it out, don't fight it out. The time by the Ministry of National Security is
6:30.
Thanks so much for staying with us inside Lead Story. We are continuing our conversation about Caricom. The meeting on the ground there in St. Kitts and Nevis is the 50th regional meeting of the heads of government. But there's a lot going on in Caricom and in the region at this time. We continue to be joined by Dr. Sanjay Badri Maharaja and Christoph Simpson here talking with us about their perspectives on what exactly is going on and how it impacts us all. Before the break, Christoph, you were talking to us about now this feeling that Caricom as a grouping was more meant to be a loose connection of states. If you listen to the speeches given by Dr. Holness and Kamla Persad-Bissessar, and not like what we heard from Dr. Terence Drew, Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis. It looks like we're not as connected, and I had asked you before the break if you thought that was geography. You said that was part of it.
Could have been a part of it. A lot of the attitude to Caricom now comes from experiences with West Indies Federation and then the attempts at other developments since, like even the OECS countries, like that development on its own, those countries would have a stronger sense of regionalism and interconnectedness. Now, the thing is, different political forces within the Caribbean have different ideals of what Caricom should be, what it should look like, what purpose it should serve. It's not necessarily that any of them are against Caricom. They just have different ideas of what Caricom should be. We could say the same thing about members of any body. Even the UN, different entities have different opinions on what the UN should have say in and what it shouldn't. Now, on the matter of foreign policy, I am of the opinion that it would make sense for countries to at least try to align foreign policy, not align where if Caricom decides on a particular line, then no country is allowed to depart from it. But at the very least, confer with each other before going out. So that would be more with what Prime Minister Motley had said, the divisions and so on. She doesn't want to discuss that outside of closed doors. Those stuff are for behind closed doors, which is how it should be. Andrew Holness isn't wrong. He is saying countries should be free to pursue their own relations, and that has always been the case. Countries have been free to pursue their own relations. But what this is coming in response to isn't a criticism of countries pursuing their own relations. It's these surprises that come sometimes when Caricom leaders would speak and everybody would sign some statement or they seem to agree with one particular line. Then you have a country, a handful of countries going off the side and saying something completely different. And we saw this in 2019, again, in the first Trump administration, where it was Andrew Holness, Alan Chesney, and some others from the region that went and met with Trump.
I met with him in Mar-a-Lago in Florida, now having a specific meeting that led quite a number of other CARICOM countries to look at us sideways. That's now what's happening here as the Shield of the Americas meeting is happening in Florida, where only 2 regional leaders have been invited. That's the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and the President of Guyana.
So the issue here isn't even that these countries are against thinking in blocks, but we have a block that has to do with our shared history, our shared political history, and we are allowing another country to kind of place us in the groups that serves itself.
Well, Dr. Badri Maharaj, let me pull you into this because there's a security calculus change for the Caribbean after yesterday's incident in Cuban waters, because we're now watching not only the first and the only president, or rather congressman of Cuban, not descent, but actual Cuban in Congress in Florida, Jimenez, say that Jamaica will pay. But Secretary of State, who is of Cuban descent, who has made it very clear that anything can be escalation, and he is a part of the Trump administration's campaign to now destabilize the Cuban government. Does everything then change after yesterday, or has it escalated even more?
Yeah, let me just say something here. This is not the first incident where Cubans may or may not have been trigger happy. Back in the 1990s, the Cuban Air Force shot down 2 unarmed aircraft that were ostensibly run by dissident groups, bringing in, that were dropping relief supplies. And that created a great deal of trouble for Cuba at the time. Now, I'm not saying the Cubans were wrong to open fire here at all, because the likelihood is that they came across a bunch of smugglers.
And the New York Times reporting,
real probability.
The New York Times reporting on this indicates that there had been 2 incidents over the past 3 years where people traffickers were attempting to move people now into and out of Cuba, and the smuggling of these people was dangerous. So the Cuban officials said that they had to take action.
Yeah, so all of these things are happening. I mean, look, nothing is just between states anymore. In that part of the world, as Cuba's military and its ability to police its own borders has deteriorated markedly since the 1990s. Smuggling, narcotics, you name it, it's happening. So invariably, the Cuban, what remains of their border police are going to be very, very cautious, and they could come under fire. There are a lot of criminal gangs operating out of that area. And the United States may be 100% right, and I suspect they are this time, that they're not directly involved. Now, coming back to Jimenez's, Congressman Jimenez's comments.
And let me see if we can put up the graphic there of Congressman Jimenez's comments, because he had tweeted this on social media platform X in response to the video that had been shared on Prime Minister Holness's official account, making it very visible and very public there. His wording there was, Jamaica will pay for its defense of a moribund dictatorship. Neutrality towards oppression is complicity.
Right. My problem is I question whether he has any ability to comprehend anything. Because your Prime Minister made a very, very, very clear opening that Jamaica supported a democratic transition. And if the United States had half a chance, it would have grabbed this opportunity to use the good offices of CARICOM, which, and let's be very clear, whatever our differences with the Cuban government or our individual government's positions on the Cuban government are concerned, our caring for the Cuban people is very much there. So in order to say, look, the dialogue will facilitate is, well, what do you want to achieve? You want to achieve a democratic transition, multi-party democracy? Right. Caricom, we're a bunch of multi-party democracies here, fractious, kind of crazy, but, you know, we generally run our elections peacefully. We can help out here. We want the Cuban people suffering to stop. So I don't know how he inferred Jamaica supporting an oppressive government from whatever your prime minister said. And this is a real problem I have with some of the American congressmen, is they go off half-cocked and don't seem to understand what is being said. And I cannot imagine how he inferred what he inferred from what your prime minister said.
The statement by Prime Minister Holness, that's why it was so important for us to play it, that 2-minute and 30-second segment of his speech is what he said about Cuba in there. But we're also talking about a congressman who's up for re-election, who had been sent out of Cuba during now the revolution in the 1960s. And he has been very, very clear that the operations that are going on in Cuba and Venezuela need to continue to make sure that there is democratic change. Is this just then the blusterings of a man who has to posture for his congressional district? He's up for re-election. Or should it matter to us? Should we be concerned about slower visa processing or tighter remittances or trade pressure because of a statement like this, Christoph?
I don't know if we have to worry about all of that, but I don't think that he would be alone in this idea that we should be totally submissive to the U.S. And that's the worry that we have. As Sanjay said, the statement made by Andrew Holness was very much aligned with Washington. It was trying to co-opt that solidarity with Cuba, but it was very much aligned with Washington. And if there is going to be any support for regime change from the Caribbean, it would have had to be clouded in such a language. Kamala's statements, on the other hand, went like very, very overt. And I think
she went on to praise the U.S. administration for their help in fighting crime in Trinidad and Tobago, saying that it was important that CARICOM member states, all of whom were there, who were democratically elected, had given Cuba the opportunity to have democratic elections there as well. She was much more visible in what it is that she thought should happen in her speech, her about 20-minute speech.
Yes, and going on about communism and all of that. She made it clear she wanted regime change in Cuba. Andrew Holness now says things pointing in that direction but doesn't come out and say it explicitly. And it goes back to what I said at the start of this. He says we need to be clear, but he's also playing it safe. He's not being clear on his position, and I can understand why. But it's funny that the same thing he's trying to avoid is what we're discussing now. We don't want to attract anger or aggression from a certain political faction in the US, but if we don't show total submission, we're going to get that from them anyways.
All right, gentlemen, before we close, quick questions to you. Sanjay first. If you were advising the governments of the region as they look at all that's going on right now, what would you tell them?
I tell them to understand something. The world has changed a lot since the Cold War. Cuba is nobody's priority globally. If we are going to play a constructive role in it, we have to align our policies to the benefit of the Cuban people. And I do not believe that right now the current Cuban government is best in a very good position to do so. At the same time, we also need to recognize the United States is our principal security provider. Now, if you want to get very, very, very serious about this, maybe CARICOM should start looking much more closely at pulling its own weight in regional security. So we are dependent less on the US for that. And we really haven't done it. And there's no reason why we can't.
Christoph?
So either we pull together and do it, or we can't complain.
All right. And Christoph?
I agree with the latter part. Totally disagree with the first part. The US does not have Cuba's best interests at heart and doesn't have the Cuban people's best interests at heart. And the crazy Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago does not have the Cuban people's best interests at heart. Cuban people alone, not anybody else in the Caribbean, are to decide the fate of their nation and their country. They support the government. They reaffirm this to the referendums that they voted in. And the US has made it clear that the intended outcome of the policy towards Cuba is to cause mass hunger, poverty, and suffering. They cannot lead any form of democratic transition that benefits the Cuban people. They are the enemy of the Cuban people. And if you align with them, what you're doing is not to benefit the Cuban people. You're lying to yourself. On the matter of security, though, we should develop our own regional security initiatives to become independent of the U.S. Southern Command, because we put ourselves in a position where they can basically occupy us anytime they want.
And certainly these are the kinds of conversations that I'm sure are occupying the minds of those in St. Kitts right now. That was Dr. Sanjay Badri Maharaj, independent defense analyst, security consultant, all the way from Trinidad and Tobago, and Christoph Simpson, chairman of Left Alliance for National Democracy and Socialism. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. The test for Caricom is not whether disagreement exists, it always has. The question is whether the region can manage divergence without collapsing into fragmentation. Up next, we'll have a discussion about how we collapse into problems and fights when we don't all get along. That's what we've had in Westmoreland. That's what happens every day in Jamaica. We'll talk about that next here inside Lead Story.
Everybody want to see if a country right now.
One thing about Jamaicans, we might have differences, but we know when something is good for all of us. And when we work together against crime and violence, we are stronger than ever. And that's how we know the Citizen Security Plan can work.
That one that name CSP.
The Citizen Security Plan is an initiative of the Ministry of National Security in partnership with the European Union. It's an all-of-government effort to create safer streets and build stronger communities. Go to mns.gov.jm to learn how you can play your part.
Enjoy peace of mind in knowing that your hard-earned money is protected by the JDIC. That's right, the JDIC through the Deposit Insurance Scheme guarantees up to $1.2 million of your deposits in commercial banks, merchant banks, and building societies. This means your deposits, such as your savings and checking accounts, are covered. Rest easy, knowing that your deposits are secure. Your deposits always protected. For more information, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at JDICJAM, or visit our website at www.jdic.org.
JDIC, protecting deposits for you and me.
From international diplomacy to domestic trauma. In Whithorn, Westmoreland, the local gas station remains a crime scene. Dacia Forrester, a 42-year-old entrepreneur, is now at the Cornwall Regional Hospital in a life and death struggle. While she underwent a successful procedure on Tuesday to remove burnt tissue, she's now in urgent need of blood donations. The pump attendant, 30-year-old Colette Swaby, has been charged with assault occasioning grievous bodily harm. But the fallout is wider. Forrester's family is desperately trying to raise $55,000 for an air ambulance to the United States because Jamaica still lacks a specialized full-service burn unit for adults. This incident, though, wasn't a sudden explosion of rage. It was a weeks-long workplace dispute that escalated in a public space near a police station. And it has sparked a national conversation about mediation, early intervention, and whether we are equipped to interrupt escalation before it turns lethal. Joining us now is counseling psychologist at the Phoenix Center, Dr. Patrice Charles King. Dr. Charles King, thanks for being with us here inside Lead Story.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Help us out, because reports suggest that this conflict was simmering for over a month. When a conflict simmers for weeks, what are the psychological warning signs that escalation is likely?
You know, I think obviously they just missed the de-escalation. So there was obviously repeated arguments. There was obviously public exchanges There was no third-party involvement to even stop it. I think that there was rumination and threat language that persons and an obvious increasing emotional intensity.
What does early intervention actually look like in practical terms? Because if you see something like this happening, what should happen?
You see something like this, at that stage, the intervention should include management mediation. It's a work incident, written warnings perhaps, some form of temporary separation of parties. Maybe they could have had formal restorative meetings at work, and just to create an understanding of what this conflict is all about. Understanding that there could be a misunderstanding, there could be miscommunication, because there's stages to escalation, and I think persons at work probably saw it but chose to stay out of it. Everybody in Jamaica, let me just mind my business, or let me use this as content to put on social media. So they probably missed that misunderstanding, miscommunication, small disagreements that weren't addressed, and just the repeated offenses that created that misunderstanding in the first place. So not addressing whatever was hurting, whatever created frustration, and not being able to identify what the threat was. So when your ego is activated, the conflict becomes about pride. It becomes about respect. It becomes about social standing. Like, you're disrespecting me at work. If everybody's seeing you disrespect me at work, it's not going to happen. So you have that public exposure. When it gets to the point where your arguments happen in public or in front of witnesses, that's where it increases the stakes. And so crisis or violence is bound to happen after that. When you have that emotional breakdown and your brain prioritizes survival or retaliation over safety, that's the end of it right
Dr. Charles King, you're talking to us about your feelings getting involved, your ego getting involved, but is there a cultural dimension as well to how Jamaicans process humiliation, anger, or perceived injustice that might be unfortunate wording that I'm going to use here, but fuel on the fire in certain circumstances like these?
Absolutely. Let me tell you something. I think we have a pull-up culture in Jamaica, right? So come pull up, come see me. Public showdown. Let me record this, post it online. So people tend to perform even when they're on camera, so they get even a boost. There's no pressure to back down. So social media has literally turned disagreements into entertainment, in spite of the fact that the consequences are very real. So you disrespect me, I'm pulling up. I don't care, I have no fear. But especially when I have people boosting me on, laughing about it, and no one to say, hey, take a pause, step back for a minute, calm down, think about what you're thinking, think about what your consequences are going to be right now. I don't think anyone in that situation was able to say that. Pause before responding, lower your voice a little bit, state what is happening without accusing, just maybe you need a clarification. If you feel like you're being threatened, do you want to step out of the situation and just calm down a minute? No one did that.
Well, this is also something that happened within earshot of a police station. Across the road from the gas station is a police station. Does this suggest a fundamental lack of trust in the police as peacemakers before something goes wrong versus being law enforcers after something has happened?
Well, were the police aware of what the conflict was? Did anyone go to the police and say, hey, there's a possibility that there is some violent action that's going to take place right now? Or did they call the police after everything got to the point of violence, when the conflict moved from just verbal to actual physical? Did anyone actually notify the police, or were the individuals in the community or the bystanders, were they too busy on their phone recording the conflict? So I can't say that the police wouldn't have intervened. I can't say that. Was the police right there when the verbal altercation began? I'm not sure.
But it certainly was across the road. So had they done what you'd said, which is think through this, they could have had the employers carry them across for mediation. They could have had friends and family who heard them as they were ruminating about this over the course of weeks, bring them so there could be some sort of intervention. There were these things that were open to them. What then would you advise someone tonight who recognized that a dispute in their life is escalating?
I think you have to understand that conflict is inevitable in relationships. Destruction, however, violence is a choice. So emotional maturity is not about avoiding hurt, but it's more about how we respond without creating irreversible damage. So to me, I believe that the strongest person in a conflict is the one who can walk away, not the one who throws the first blow.
I think that's going to be so important for somebody right now hearing about not only the cultural dimension of Jamaicans being boosted and having them incentivized by their friends and family members who sometimes don't talk them down, but also making sure that they avoid some of the most serious and life-threatening consequences of escalating violence. Counseling psychologist at the Phoenix Center, Dr. Patrice Charles King. There's so many people right now who've heard your words and are thinking twice about what's going on. Thank you for that. So bring an important perspective. Prevention requires both individual responsibility and systemic capacity. So we need to make sure that she said, you go to the police station, you get the intervention, but you also have that sort of management of self. But here's my take. Sovereignty is not a slogan, it's a strategy. And tonight we have seen that strategy tested at every level. In our courts, Chief Justice Sykes is pushing for transparency by bringing cameras into the gun court. It's a bold move, but transparency without understanding is just theater. So we must ensure that open justice actually educates the public rather than just entertaining them. Abroad, the pressure is mounting. When a U.S. congressman tells Jamaica, we will pay for our diplomatic stance, we cannot afford to be naive. In a world where the U.S. is bypassing Caricom to make deals with individual leaders, Jamaica must decide if it wants to be the last defender of a fracturing unity or if we need a new map. But perhaps the most urgent lesson comes from Westmoreland. A fire that consumed Dacia Forrester didn't start with a match. It started with an unresolved dispute that the system ignored. Whether it is geopolitics or a local gas station, the cost of failed intervention is always the same. Escalation. That is the story. I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and on behalf of the entire CVM production team, thank you for watching Lead Story. Have a fantastic evening, and I hope you stay safe. Up next, CVM News.